Welcome to Best Evidence. My name is John Titus. In this episode, I want to talk about central bank digital currencies, CBDC for short, in the U.S., and plans to make CBDC an inescapable part of the monetary system and eventually an exclusive form of money in our monetary system. It may take a while, but it's on the way. Because CBDC is a means for control, the powers that be need to put a giant smiley face on top of it to sell it to the population being targeted for control. Luckily for the criminals running our system, that population is extraordinarily gullible. How gullible, you ask? Well, let's take a look at the smiley face itself, keeping in mind that this is what the top criminal global bankers imagine as convincing the population that CBDC is a great idea. The pitch for CBDC is, it's all about inclusion. That's the buzzword, inclusion. We at the top of this digital utopia feel sorry for you cretins. I mean, people living under bridges without iPhones or internet, because those people are unable to enjoy the amenities of our awesomeness. We here of the CBDC Welcome Wagon are here to rescue the unbanked and the underbanked. Those are their terms. We are here to rescue the unbanked from their pitiful plight. Okay? And there was actually a seminar on this recently at the IMF. The seminar title is Central Bank Digital Currencies for Financial Inclusion, Risks and Rewards. The date of that seminar was October 14th, 2022. As you can see, this is just a talent show for policy wonks. They come out and they all going to recite their scripts. Or they're going to read from their scripts. The guy we want to focus in on here is Bo Lee. We'll get to him in a minute. We'll talk about what he has to say. In any case, it does not take much research to see that inclusion really has nothing to do with the people that it's supposed to help and everything to do with controlling the population. Let's take a look at a speech from a member of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve expressly calling out inclusion as nothing but a contrivance. This speech is from August of 2021. You can see here it was given by Governor Christopher Waller. And if we look, I want to search on this thing. If you look here in the lower left, I'm going to search on FDIC to go to the relevant disclosure. Here we go. Okay. According to a recent Federal Reserve Deposit Insurance Corporation survey, FDIC survey, approximately 5.4% of households were unbanked in 2019. 5.4%. That's it. I'm actually kind of surprised it's that many people without bank accounts. But the key finding is this. The survey found that approximately 75% of the unbanked population were not at all interested or not very interested in having a bank account to begin with. And that is a huge clue as to what's behind the central banker obsession with the so-called unbanked. The vast majority of them do not want bank accounts, and by definition don't have bank accounts, and central bankers want to change that. So they've come up with this Orwellian inclusion propaganda. And if you go on here and you looked at what Waller says, he says expressly down here, it is implausible to me that developing a CBDC is the simplest, least costly way to reach this 1% of households, meaning the 25% of 5.4%. That's a tiny amount, he says. And so this whole inclusion campaign is simply implausible. And he's right about that. So all this concern over the unbanked is not about people's inability to access electronic banking. That has nothing to do with it. It's all about people's ability to evade electronic banking and evade the digital train tracks. And that's, you saw from the FDIC's own survey, that's really what's going on. They're concerned about that 75% that doesn't want bank accounts, the 75% of the 5.4%. So financial inclusion really isn't, welcome to our club, you 1% of households who don't have bank accounts and want them. It's really about getting the roughly about 2,000, 2,100 homes, households per county who don't want bank accounts and don't have bank accounts, electronic bank accounts, in under the tent, and getting rid of cash, of course. and saying, once you're inside this tent, now you just can't leave. And that's really the aim of this inclusion campaign. Central bank digital currency is sold as inclusion. In fact, it is a device to exclude anyone who doesn't want to play ball with this digital system, this digital entrapment, from eating by cutting off their electronic money. And we'll see that expressly here in a minute or two. The question, if you're a central banker, is how do you start blocking those exits? How do you get the maximum number of people using CBDC rather than other forms of payment? Well, the IMF dropped some big hints on that score in that seminar I just pointed to. So let's go over here to that seminar. And here we have Bo Li again. He is the deputy managing director of the IMF. So he is a top-ranking proponent of CBDC. His presentation is very, very dense. You can see he's reading from a script here. And so it's dense. And what I've done, I've chopped up his presentation into short clips that are really digestible. But let's start with Bo's most interesting reveal, which is his personal rock and roll CBDC fantasy. Take it away, Arbo Debo.
CBDC can allow government agencies and private sector players to program, to create smart contract, to allow targeted policy functions. For example, welfare payment. For example, consumption coupon. For example, food stamp. By programming CBDC, those money can be precisely targeted for what kind of people can own and what kind of use this money can be utilized. For example, for food. So this potential programmability can help government agencies to precisely target their support to those people who need support. So that way can also improve financial inclusion.
Wow. Could we get somebody over here to clean up Bo's chairs? Thank you, Arbo Debo, for being so candid about your fetish for controlling people's food. Did you catch that? He mentions controlling food twice in under a minute. So Bo Li just flat out told you that CBDC is about control. You voiced an opinion that is not on Arbo Debo's circuit board, and your digital food wallet shrinks. Isn't that great? Now, you might say, well, I'm not on welfare. I don't use food stamps. So while you've explained central bankers, rock and roll control fantasy, to be sure, you haven't explained how they'll ensnare me. So let's go. I want to go to the next clip where Arbo Debo gives us a very major clue as to how central bankers plan to shunt as many people as possible into CBDC usage. He is talking about inclusion, which, as I explained earlier, is an Orwellian term. And here he reveals a key feature of CBDC that central bankers plan to use as a Trojan horse for forcing people to use CBDC. Listen to this carefully.
The second aspect that CBDC can help improve financial inclusion is because of its legal tender status. Because CBDC is an obligation of central bank. And the obligation of central bank is a legal tender in every country. So it is widely accepted. That creates potential value for everyone to use it.
Okay, you can see why I had to chop up Bo's presentation. There's a lot there in just 30 seconds. Inclusion, legal tender, it's an obligation of a central bank, wide acceptance, everyone can use it. But he gives away the whole point at the very end there when he says, creates potential value for everyone to use it. All those things beforehand, legal tender, obligation to central bank and all that, those are recited in service of that end goal, everyone using CBDC. That is the ultimate goal. Make no mistake about that. And all those other things are items on the central banker's punch list because they're seen as taking CBDC from zero usage to universal usage. So what I want to do is I want to go back through that clip one more time and break down Arbo Debo's rapid fire data dump there into smaller chunks. Court reporter, can I get this back in little bow-sized chunks? That would be wonderful. Awesome. Okay, here we go.
The second aspect that CBDC can help improve financial inclusion is because of its legal tender status.
Okay, legal tender status. What is legal tender and how does it promote inclusion? Let's take the first question first. What is legal tender? The short answer is legal tender is the only real money in our system. In the U.S. since 1933, it has been cash, including Federal Reserve notes and coin, and you can see that here from the relevant statute. Here is the relevant statute concerning legal tender in the U.S. It is 31 U.S.C. Section 5103. You can see it there in the upper right. I'm going to zoom in so we can actually read it. Legal tender. United States coins and currency, including Federal Reserve notes and some previous notes, historical notes, note issuance, are legal tender for all debts, public charges, etc. That's a short list. It's basically coins and currency. It's Federal Reserve notes and coins. That's it. It's a very short list. Everything else in our system is pseudo money. It is almost real money, but it has a latent but huge legal catch that comes with it. So let me run through a quick list of pseudo money before I explain what that legal catch is. Credit cards, they are not real money. Checks, not real money. Money in your bank account, wire transfers, Venmos, bank drafts, certified checks, PayPal, cashier's checks, money orders, even reserves on account, meaning central bank deposits on account at the Fed, are not legal tender. None of this legally, none of those things legally is money. Because as I said, it comes with a catch. And the catch is this. If you owe money and you try to pay with one of those forms of pseudo money, your lender does not have to accept your payment, which keeps your debt alive. Okay? Pseudo money is not real money. It doesn't become real money until your lender consents to it as a form of repayment. So in other words, pseudo money plus consent equals real money. Real money does not depend on lender consent. Real money means it's coin of the realm. And the realm says real money erases debt whether the creditor wants it to or not. Whether or not your lender wants the tender of legal tender to erase the debt, that debt is gone. So if you owe your creditor money and you offer to pay with legal tender, that debt gets erased. It gets extinguished as a matter of law, regardless of whether your lender consents. The debt is just gone legally. And so your lender's legal right to your collateral is gone too. And that's a very important thing. Now, there might be a lending contract that says the lender agrees to accept Venmo or credit card or bank money or whatever else. You know, the lender can freely agree to accept the pseudo money. But all that means is that the lender consented in advance to accept the pseudo money. You still need the consent one way or the other, before or after. If you are like me, though, you've lived your entire life without seeing a lender ever reject any form of payment of a debt. They always take the payment. But I bring this up because legal tender is a hole card that is out there and you need to know about, because Bo there just flashed you the ace of spades, legal tender, in direct connection with CBDC. And you need to pay attention to that. Because if you think that the powers that be would not resort to legal trickery with legal tender, you're just dead wrong on the facts about that. Think of it this way. If you have a $10, $100 bills in your hand and you're standing outside of the bank, that's real money. You own that money. But if you walk inside that bank and you open an account with $1,000 in cash, now all you've got is a claim to real money. You become an unsecured creditor of the bank. If that bank goes bust, you've got nothing. That does not happen with real money. Okay? So how does all this background about legal tender relate to CBDC? How would CBD status as legal tender help it gain a foothold so, as Bo there says, everyone uses it? Well, I want you to think back to inclusion. It's not about getting a handful of people into the tent. It's really about forcing everyone else to stay in the tent. Fundamentally, inclusion is a deception. I want you to remember there are only about 1 million households that are unbanked and that actually want access to electronic banking. The vast majority of unbanked choose that status freely. But inclusion is pitched generally, though, as helping the less fortunate. It's pitched as welfare. And that covers a much bigger political beachhead, orders of magnitude bigger than the 1 million homes that don't have bank accounts and that want bank accounts. Notice how casually Bo there moved from the unbanked beachhead of about 1 million to the food stamps beachhead, which includes 42 million people. What justifies the leap from unbanked to EBT? Is there any evidence that EBT users, food stamp users, are unbanked? Of course not. EBT, it stands for electronic benefit transfer. The only thing CBDC adds to that equation is control over 40 million people. But that doesn't matter to Bo and company. What does matter to them is being able to sweep, 100 million people total roughly on welfare, getting government checks, sweeping those 100 million people into the CBDC tent, using feel-good rubric of inclusion and some yarn about unbanked, which really only applies to 1 million people. In other words, when you see Bo and company in policy seminars like the IMF here, you see these people patting themselves on the back. They're patting themselves on the back not for helping 1 million people without bank accounts, but for amassing an army of 100 million CBDC users. Central bankers are not interested in helping 100 million people. What they are interested in is using 100 million people, using a third of the country to get the other 2/3 in line until everyone uses CBDC. And they just told you flat out, they're going to put legal tender at the very tip of that mega spear. If you're a business and you've got customers who owe you money and they offer to pay you with their inclusion CBDC or Medicare CBDC card or EBT CBDC, who knows? They offer to pay you with CBDC, you're going to take it or you're not going to get paid. Because the offer to pay with legal tender, as we just saw, erases debt whether you accept the form of payment or not. So your choice really boils down to get on the CBDC inclusion train and get paid or get hosed on the whole debt. Oh, and by the way, while you're trying to decide whether to go the CBDC route, you are going to be absolutely bombarded with propaganda about how dirty cash is, how it spreads disease. I already saw that early on in the pandemic. I was driving around on the Indiana and Illinois toll roads, and I'd see these billboards saying, hey, don't use that 1 lane for cash. Use one of the 6 lanes for credit cards because credit cards are clean and cash is dirty. That campaign's already got kicked off. They pulled it pretty quickly, but I remember it early on because I wasn't going to fly with a mask on. You can forget that. In any case, the powers that be are going to pull out all the stops to make sure you go broke if you don't use CBDC. Now, how do I know that's the plan? The answer to that is that there is a very important tell during Bo's spiel. He told a huge lie about the law of money and about the Federal Reserve Act in particular. And I'll bet dollars to donuts, actually with inflation, I'll bet donuts to dollars that law is about to change. I want to go to that clip. I'm actually going to just replay the last clip about legal tender, but this time I'm going to let it keep running so we can hear Bo explain why he thinks CBDC is legal tender. Listen to this.
The second aspect that CBDC can help improve financial inclusion is because of its legal tender status. Because CBDC is an obligation of central bank. And the obligation of central bank is a legal tender in every country. So it is widely accepted.
Obligation of central bank is legal tender in every country. No, that actually is not true. Obligations of central bank are not legal tender in every country because in the U.S., where good old Bo here got his law degree from Harvard, explains why he's indifferent to what the law is, cash and coin, which are legal tender, they're not obligations of the Fed. Coins aren't liabilities of the Fed at all. They're assets. The Fed pays the U.S. Treasury face value for coins. And if you wonder about that, I have a video on that called What's Behind the Fed's Manufactured Coin Shortage. And cash, it's true that cash, Federal Reserve notes, is listed as a liability of the Fed's balance sheet. But legally, cash is an obligation of the U.S., not of the Fed. How do we know that? Because the Federal Reserve Act says so. Let me just go here. Here we are looking at the Federal Reserve Act, actually the relevant portion from the Federal Reserve Act, which is Section 16. You can see up there note issues, meaning Federal Reserve note. It's long, but it's really only the first paragraph that's germane. So I want to zoom in on that. And here you go. Here are the note issues, Federal Reserve notes. Okay, that's what they're talking about. And you can see here, said notes shall be obligations of the United States and shall be receivable for all this stuff. Note how they're obligations of the United States and they're receivable by Federal Reserve banks. Those are two distinct entities. Bo is just flat out wrong that legal tender in the U.S. is an obligation of the central bank. It is not. It is an obligation of the U.S. He's just dead wrong about that. So when Bo tells you obligations of the central bank or legal tender in every country, he's actually reading, I'd bet you donuts to dollars, he's reading from a draft amendment to the existing Federal Reserve Act. Because under present law, under currently configured Federal Reserve Act, Bo's lying. You just saw that. Federal Reserve notes are obligations of the United States, are not obligations of the Fed. That probably tells you, I would imagine, where the Fed sees, the need to change the law in order to get central bank digital currencies in place. Chairman Powell is already on record as saying we need to change the law. We need enabling legislation. And Bo was talking the entire time in his presentation about central bank digital currencies in the present tense. But in any case, that the changes to the law, that is a topic and a battle for another day. For now, the plan for CBDC should be clear enough for you to start thinking about what to do about it. I have some thoughts on that myself and on that topic. And so does, it would appear, at least one U.S. senator who's doing something about it, thankfully. I'll talk about that another time. For now, happy Thanksgiving. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I will see you next time.